Hey everybody, welcome. This training is going to be especially applicable for you if you feel like you've had a consistent stream of intrusive fears that you can't seem to shake, especially if you've been trying a lot of different coping mechanisms. Maybe you've even tried a lot of positive thinking, but for some reason you just can't seem to shake these kind of recurring, intrusive, unnecessary fears. So, welcome. My name is Ty Hicks, founder of mentalhealthcoaching.com. I put this content out there for you guys because I used to struggle with very severe anxiety and depression, and traditional therapy and medication and other coping mechanisms didn't really work for me. So I had to find my own way to overcome those issues. And thankfully, I've been anxiety and depression free for over 10 years and have helped over 500 people dramatically reduce their anxiety and depression as well. And so we put this content out there for you guys because nobody deserves to live a life with anxiety and depression. It just requires certain skills that you have to learn and you have to implement in order to have the mental health that you deserve. So this little framework, I really want you to buckle in for this one because I think this will be a heavy hitter for you guys. The reason I say that is because this one is battle tested. This is not theory. I have actually used this exact framework on myself many different times, and I've used it probably thousands of times now with different clients over the years, and it has proven to be one of the most effective tools that I've ever developed in my career. And I think the reason being is it really, really digs deep. Okay. If you have been feeling for a long time that you've been dealing with anxiety and you haven't really found a lasting way to get it handled, what you've probably felt is that you're dealing with things kind of at the surface or the symptom level, but you're not really getting to the real root cause of the problem. You're not, figuring out a way to make sure that the intrusive thoughts are popping up from in the first place. You may have found some good ways of managing those intrusive thoughts or moving through your life in spite of those intrusive thoughts, but you might be still having a tough time getting out from that sort of coping trap where you're constantly responding to the anxiety. And this tool has been incredibly helpful in actually removing the source of the intrusive thoughts to begin with. So the overall percentage of intrusive thoughts drops and drops and drops very substantially. But I will warn you that it only works if you really follow it to a T and if you really basically do it very thoroughly and fully, which would kind of make sense, right? I mean, that's just kind of a general rule of life is if you do something half-assed, you're going to get half-assed results. So this is not the place for people who want to just dip their toe in the water. This is not the place for people who want to be casual about their anxiety recovery. This is really for people who are serious about getting the mental health they deserve and they're willing to do the work necessary to do it. I'll eliminate the guesswork for you. You just got to be the one to be willing to implement, okay? So I see a lot of people are joining us live. Go ahead and type in yes if you can hear me, please, in the comments. It's always a mystery each week if we're going to have a technical issue every time we do these live streams. So go ahead and let me know. Also, if you have a particular belief or a particular fear, an intrusive fear or belief that you would like me to kind of use as an example, let us know in the comments what that would be. And I can kind of keep that in mind as I'm teaching you this process. So this process was originally inspired to me by a woman named Byron Katie. She's worth looking up and looking into. She has a good book that's kind of worth reading. But this process was initially inspired by a little framework that she taught, which was sort of in the same way. How do you take an intrusive thought or a belief that's been really sticking in your mind, and how do you turn it around? The reason why I created my own adaptation is I found that this version, I tried many different versions, and I found that this version I'm about to teach you is a little bit more powerful. It tends to get a little bit of a deeper, more lasting result. But I do want to just pay homage to Byron Katie, who was an inspiration for this process. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So the very first process, the very first step in the process, I should say, this is a 9-step process. And by the way, we do have a completely free gift for those of you who are attending live. If you would like it, go ahead and stick with us through to the end. And we have a totally free gift for you where you can actually apply this a little bit more easily. So I'll share that in a moment. But the very first step is you're going to do the following. Okay, so this would be the time to take some notes if you've got the ability to do that. Number one, you need to identify the limiting thought or belief. Sometimes the limiting thought or belief that you want to get rid of is one that you are already very well aware of. It may be one that you consistently say inside of your mind or one that you say out loud, such as, if I go out in public, I'm going to have a panic attack, or I can't do my presentation in the morning meeting because I'm just going to make a fool of myself, or my mother-in-law doesn't like me, right? Whatever it is, okay? You may say this thought to yourself and out loud, and so it may be very easily identifiable, but in the majority of cases, probably 80% of the time, you're not going to know exactly what the specific fear is or what the specific thought or belief is that needs to be challenged. All you will know is that you're feeling anxious, you are feeling fearful, you are feeling a little bit of a problem with freezing up, basically. Like you try to move forward in a particular area of your life, and then all of a sudden you have a difficulty with that. You're not moving forward. You feel stuck, basically. So if you're feeling either anxious or stuck, or what we call unresourceful, as in like a lack of confidence or something along those lines, then this would be very applicable to you. And you're going to have to pluck the thought or the belief out of your subconscious so that way we can actually address it and work with it and remove it. Because if we don't accurately identify what that thought or fear is, then everything else is just a little bit of a waste of time, okay? So here's what you want to do. If you are trying to determine what belief is causing you to feel emotional pain in a certain situation, what you need to ask yourself is this question: what would I have to believe in order to feel this way? So think about what it is that you're feeling, right, in that certain situation. Maybe you're feeling anxious while driving, for example. And you would ask yourself, okay, what would I have to believe to feel this way? And I'll give you a little tip. You want to go with the very first answer that comes up to you, kind of trust your intuition. And so that initial answer may be something like, I'm going to get in a car wreck. Okay, and so that's what you would want to write down. Now, I'll give you another pro tip with this as well. On this very first step where you are identifying the fears, you're identifying the irrational thoughts and fears, it is very helpful to do this process multiple times, to do step one multiple times, so that you get every single thought and fear out on paper that you need to. That would be a really powerful way to do that. So there will usually be multiple limiting beliefs driving some type of a negative emotion or behavior. So you want to ask yourself this question until you feel that you have identified every single one of them. And then you're going to go through steps 2 through 9 for each and every one of the beliefs and the fears that need to be addressed. However, sometimes limiting fears and beliefs come in clusters. Okay, so for example, you might have a fear that says, I'm going to get in a car wreck if I drive my car. Something bad is going to happen when I drive my car. I can't drive my car, etc. Okay, things of that nature. All of those are very much sort of the same fear, right? You can see how they all are kind of different versions of the same sort of fear. And so what you want to do is identify the trunk of the tree rather than trying to address the branches of the tree. So, for example, that core fear that might be driving a lot of those fears around driving would be something like, something bad is going to happen when I drive, right? And so the mind may branch off in lots of different versions of that fear, like, oh, I'm going to get in a wreck, I'm going to pass out, whatever. But if we address that core fear, then the other ones will very likely take care of themselves. So once you've gotten for the step 1 done and you've identified each one of these fears that kind of is, you're pulling out of your brain that's getting in the way for you, what you can then do is look at that list that you've identified, and then what you would want to do is say, okay, well, which one of these is kind of like the mother of all of the other fears? Like, which one of these is the biggest one, or which one holds the most, emotional space in your mind, right? I see Yoe's asking, how to identify the core? Repeat the same question. Yep, so basically you would ask yourself this same question several times, and what will happen is you will reach a natural point where you'll go, you know what? I think that's basically all of the fears. I think that's all of the beliefs that would be causing me to feel this way or behave this way and cause this issue. So you'll kind of naturally know. It's usually somewhere between like 3 and 6. So you'll basically figure it out that way. Okay? So you go through those, and if you're not sure which one is the core, then just simply order the beliefs in terms of which one occupies the most space in your brain and work backwards from there. So in other words, you'd start with the most powerful one, the fear that's causing you the most issues, and then work your way down towards the fears that are causing you the least issues. And very often what will happen is if you've got, like, say, let's say you've got a list of 6 beliefs that you think you need to eliminate, you may get through the first 3, and by the time you follow steps 2 through 9 on those top 3 beliefs, you may not even believe 4, 5, and 6 anymore. So you may not even need to go through this process for the less powerful beliefs. That's why we want to start with the ones that are more powerful. Okay? So step 2, once you have adequately identified what that belief is by asking yourself, okay, what would I have to believe in order to feel how I'm feeling? Then you're going to move to step 2, and we're going to only do this for one belief at a time. We're going to do steps 2 through 9 for one belief at a time. Now, this is where I want to caution you, because this is where you've got to follow these instructions very much to a T if you really want to make sure that you get the right result with this. Okay? So what you would write down for yourself for question number 2 is that really true? And then in parentheses, you would want to put yes or no only. Okay? Is that really true? Yes or no only. Why yes or no only? Well, here's the thing. Fear, it has been said that fear is nothing more than false evidence appearing real. So if I have got, let's say, agoraphobia, and I've got an issue with driving my car, for example, we could take lots of different anxieties, health anxiety, social anxiety, whatever. But let's just say we've got agoraphobia. And I have a belief that says if I drive my car, something bad is going to happen. That could be just the same as someone with health anxiety saying, I'm going to have a heart attack, or someone with social anxiety saying, my boss doesn't like me, okay? Any of those fears, any of those beliefs are assumptions, okay? They are assumptions. They are assumptions about the future. And why do we know that they're assumptions? They're assumptions because it is a claim about what something is or what something means before we actually verify that it is true. Like if I say to myself, I'm going to pass out when I drive my car, how do I know? Right? I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have the ability to see into the future. I don't know for sure that I'm going to pass out. I'm simply assuming that I'm going to pass out. Same thing with me saying my boss doesn't like me, or I'm going to have a heart attack. You don't know that you're going to have a heart attack. You're assuming that you're going to have a heart attack. So anxiety can only exist, emotional pain can only exist when we are making an assumption that has not been properly investigated in the mind. So if you want to feel emotional freedom, if you want to feel like you've got as many choices as possible, then what you've got to do is you've got to eliminate each one of these assumptions. Every single assumption that you make kind of boxes you in, right? If I assume I can't go to the grocery store, or my boss doesn't like me, or I'm going to have a heart attack, that all of a sudden puts me in a box, that limits me, that makes me now believe I have fewer options than I actually have. And we feel anxiety and emotional pain, depression as well, in direct proportion to how few choices we convince ourselves that we have. So part of the reason we're going through this process is to make sure that you are no longer convincing yourself that you have fewer options than you actually do have. To do that, we have to adequately challenge, okay, keyword challenge, the assumption. We have to challenge the old belief. And to challenge it, what we have to do is we have to take this thing from being just simply an assumption, and we have to have you look at it more, we could say deliberately. We have to make you look at it more consciously and say, well, hold on a second. Is this really true? I've been assuming that it's been true for days or weeks or months or years or decades, but is it really true? Yes or no? And the reason why it's yes or no is because what you're going to be tempted to do, like, for example, if we take the belief, my boss doesn't like me. If you were to ask yourself, is that really true? Your mind is going to be tempted to go, well, it's kind of true because, there was that one time I'm pretty sure I pissed him off. And, that one, we've had kind of a rough quarter and, I think he blames me for such and such. Your mind is going to want to basically fill in the blanks with a story, right? And the story is exactly the thing that we're trying to get rid of. The story is just a justification for keeping the old assumption that needs to be eliminated. So you don't want to try to eliminate limiting beliefs by stacking on more limiting beliefs on top of it. What we're trying to do is basically like pluck the limiting belief out of your brain like a weed in a garden. So when you ask yourself, well, hold on a second, is it really true? Yes or no? Yes or no only. And you've got to consciously make yourself answer that question. What you're going to find is 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. And once you admit to yourself, no, it is not true, you are now way further along in the process of gaining emotional freedom from that old belief. It becomes really powerful. Okay? So that's the first big thing that you're going to do is step 2, ask yourself, is that really true? Yes or no? Now let's go on to step 3. Step 3, again, the wording here is very important. It's very important that you get this kind of exactly how I'm teaching it to you, okay? Question 3 is, can you absolutely know that this limiting thought or belief is true? Yes or no only. Okay, now there's a second version of this question that will make it a little bit easier for you to actually implement this step. Quick little water break, 1 second. Okay, so the second version of the question is, do you have 100% of the information necessary to confirm that that thought or belief is true? Do you have 100% of the information necessary? So if I tell myself my boss doesn't like me, right, and I ask myself, well, hold on a second, do I have 100% of the information necessary to confirm that that thought is true? Like, has my boss directly told me that they don't like me? Like, do I know firsthand for sure? Have they confirmed and told me that? And even if they were to have told me that, that may have been in the past. That may have been a week ago or a month ago. So can I absolutely know with absolute certainty that they don't like me right now in the present? Okay. Another example would be sometimes people will say things to themselves like, my husband always lies to me, or my wife is never grateful for me. And the challenge with that is you're making a universal statement. Anytime you're making a statement about something like always or never or no one or everyone or all the time, those are basically almost always assumptions, and they are limiting beliefs because we're making an assumption about how things are all the time, and it's just almost always never true. So for you to say, my wife always lies to me, you would have to, like, I don't even know the amount of information you would need to verify that that is true, right? Like, you'd have to basically have her hooked up to a lie detector test constantly with an expert monitoring the results in order for you to verify that she literally lies to you every single time she communicates with you. That's the only way that you would have the verification that your belief is true. Now, at this point in the process, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Ty, obviously it's not that, my wife always lies to me or whatever. I know that, but it feels like she always does. And this is where I have to challenge you as a coach and tell you that I'm sorry, but you're mistaken. The reason why it feels like she always lies to you is because you tell yourself she always lies to you. The reason why you feel that you can't drive is because you keep telling yourself you can't drive. The reason why you feel that you're going to have a heart attack is because you keep telling yourself you're going to have a heart attack. Repetition creates belief. Any thought that you repeat inside of your mind enough times will become a belief, even if you logically know it's not true. This became apparent to me when I worked with a client a couple of years ago, and her anxiety was literally that a comet was going to hit the Earth and that we were all going to explode and die. We were basically going to be like the dinosaurs. Now, what was fascinating, though, is that she had 2 different beliefs in her mind at both times. She had researched this, and she had Googled it, and she had looked it up, and she knew there was no evidence that a comet was coming to the Earth and was going to kill us. She knew that. However, she kept having this intrusive thought of a comet is going to hit over and over and over again, and she couldn't really seem to shake it until she did this process. And one of the key steps in this process was question number 3, where she had to ask herself, wait a minute, do I have 100% of the information necessary to know for sure that a comet is going to hit the Earth? And when she did this exercise, she said, the answer is no, definitively. In fact, I have plenty of evidence that tells me the comet is not going to hit the Earth. Okay, so this was a big part in kind of dislodging that assumption that her mind continued to make. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. Can you absolutely know that it is true? And if you can't absolutely know, if you don't have 100% of the evidence, then that means no. The answer is no. Right? Now, again, here, your mind might be tempted to go, well, I don't have 100% of the information, but I am pretty sure because blah, 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 blah. And that's where you have to stop yourself and go, no. Do I have 100% of the information necessary to confirm that this belief is true? Yes or no? That's it. And just answer it yes or no, because by forcing yourself to answer that, you're taking the thought out of the realm of belief. That's what gives you the freedom. If you continue to justify the belief, if you continue to give it fuel and energy and rationalization and justification, then your mind will still be able to assume that it is true. And it is through the assuming that it is true that it has power over you. Think about it. If you assume that if I drive this vehicle, I'm going to crash that car, if you assume that is true, anybody's going to feel anxiety if they assume that that is true. But if you instead get to a place of that's not true, that's completely ridiculous, then you're not going to feel any anxiety. So what we're doing is we're getting the belief out of the realm of assumption. Okay? So that's step number 3. Okay? By the way, if any of you guys would be willing to put these in the comments, it would really help the community out. So to recap, step number one is identify the limiting thought or belief. And do this by asking yourself, what would I have to believe to feel this way? That's step number 1. Step 2 is to ask yourself, is that thought or belief really true? Yes or no only. Step 3 is ask yourself, can I absolutely know that that thought or belief is true? Yes or no only. All right? Those are the first 3 steps. Now, step number 4 is who do you become when you believe that thought? Okay, now this is a question with multiple sub-questions underneath it. Okay, so the overarching question is who do you become when you believe that limiting thought or belief? And what we're doing here is we have to get you associated to the consequences of believing the old thought or belief, because human beings never make a change unless they feel the consequences of failing to make that change. Human beings will avoid making change as long as they possibly can until they realize that if they continue to avoid making the change, it's going to cause them a lot more pain than they are willing to tolerate. In fact, if you think about major times in your life when you made a really profound change, it was probably where you had been putting up with a certain level of pain for a while, and then all of a sudden you got to a spot where you were like, you know what, that is it. I'm not willing to tolerate this anymore. And that's when you made the change, when all of a sudden you hit a threshold and the level of pain was too much. So what we're doing here with step number 4 is we are making sure that your mind gets adequately associated to the consequences of holding on to this thought and to this belief. All right? I see a couple questions coming in. Let me address these real quick. One by Yowei, he says, I've always had problems answering that who do you become question. Could you share some examples? Yep, I'll be right with you in a second. Joan says, these days I don't even get past the first question to avoid indulging any further or trying to defend the limiting belief past question number 1. So that's cool. So Joan is somebody who was actually a client of ours. She's well versed and practiced in this process. So that's good that she's able to kind of detach from it right away. So Yoe, let me answer that with these. So there are 4 sub-questions. So think of these as 4A, 4B, 4C, and 4D, okay? So the overarching question is, who do you become when you believe that thought? So 4A is, how do you feel? How do you feel when you believe that limiting thought? Right? So that's the thing that you would want to answer. And some answers might be fearful, anxious, worried, upset, sad, depressed, whatever. So just how do you feel? Okay? 4B is, what does it cause you to believe is impossible? Right? So if I assume and believe I can't go and drive, pretty obvious what I'm going to believe is impossible. If I say my boss doesn't like me, what does that cause me to believe is impossible? Well, it might make me feel like I can't get a promotion, I'm not going to get a raise, this isn't the right company for me, it's not going to work out long term, right? It could cause me to believe a lot of things are impossible. And this is a big part. We're basically trying to help you identify what is the box that this belief has boxed you into, right? What are the choices that it has convinced you do not have? 4C is, what does it cause you to want to do? Okay, now this is very important. every belief causes a feeling, and every feeling causes a behavior. So if I say to myself, I cannot drive, that's going to create a feeling, obviously, of anxiety, stuckness, uncertainty. And then from that feeling, the behavior I'm going to do, the last thing I'm going to do is go drive my car, right? What I'm probably going to end up doing is asking for a ride or taking the bus or probably just staying at home, right? If I believe my boss doesn't like me, what is that going to cause me to do behavior-wise? Well, probably to avoid my boss, probably to be sheepish and shy and to not really go the extra mile at work, or maybe it'll cause me to try to be like a people pleaser, right? It's going to cause a lot of problems. So that's 4C. What does the belief cause you to want to do? And then 4D is what kind of person does it cause you to be? So think about your overall like identity here. All right, so if I believe my boss doesn't like me, what kind of person does that cause me to be? Well, an inconfident person, a shy person, a person who's not a go-getter, somebody who is timid, someone who doesn't believe in themselves, someone who is awkward in social situations, right? That would be kind of the identity that would create. So that's what you want to think about. That example of the individual who believed the comet was going to hit the Earth, right? What does it cause her to believe is impossible? Well, a whole lot, like living her life, really. What does it cause her to want to do? What it was doing for her was making her not want to go to work and, basically like not want to do anything except stay in bed. And then what kind of person does it cause you to be, right? It's pretty easy to tell. So you're going to get associated to the consequences with step 4. Don't overthink it. With any of these questions, just go with basically the first couple answers that shows up for you. And, don't overthink it beyond that. Okay, so that's step number 4. Step number 5 is what will be the ultimate consequences if you continue to believe that thought? What will be the ultimate consequences if you continue to believe that thought? Okay, so now here's where things get really powerful. If you think back to a time when you made a really dramatic change in your life, remember how I said that we avoid making changes until it becomes way too painful to avoid making the change anymore? This is a way to spur yourself to make change. And these are some of the modifications that I made to Byron Katie's original process, because I found that just asking yourself, is it true? And is it really true is not enough. You have to really get yourself associated to the consequences of the old mindset in your gut, so that way you feel the compulsion to pluck the weed out of the garden. So step 5 is what will be the ultimate consequences if you continue to believe this thought. So what you want to do mentally here is basically forecast out the next year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, the rest of your life. If you don't get rid of this belief or thought, what is it going to do in terms of creating this constant cycle of feeling and then behavior and then results, and then feeling and then behavior and then results? So we can take a few examples. If I say to myself, I can't drive, what would be the ultimate consequences of me believing that thought? The obvious answer is I'm not going to drive. But you got to dig deeper here. You really got to dig deep and get very specific, okay? So you want to try to come up with at least like 10 answers to this. So if I kind of mentally imagine that, if I believed I can't drive, what would that cost me? Well, that would mean it's probably going to put a strain on my relationship, because now I got to depend on other people. Right, I'm going to irritate other people. I'm going to be basically feeling like a burden to other people. That's going to be a problem. If I believe that, it's going to keep me from feeling independent, feeling free. I'm not going to be able to even just go to the grocery store. It's going to mean I have to miss a lot of experiences. I'm going to miss out on concerts and going to amusement parks and going to parties and going to family events and graduations and weddings and all sorts of things like that. It means I'm never going to take a cross-country road trip. It means I might not visit the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone or any of these other places. You see where I'm going, right? So you basically want to get as long of a list as you possibly can here, and you're basically kind of twisting the knife, but you're doing it therapeutically, meaning you're getting yourself associated to the pain of holding on to the old belief on purpose, so that way, when we get to the final steps of the process, you'll really pull it out of your brain and refuse to indulge it. Okay, so that is step 5. Thank you so much, Carla, by the way, for writing the questions into the chat. Really appreciate it. Okay, step 6, here's where things get fun. So step 6 is also a 4-part question. So there's a 6A, 6B, 6C, and 6D. But it's basically just the opposite of question number 4. Now, this is the question that I like to call the Men in Black question. So for those of you who have seen the movie, if you're like 30 years old or older, you've probably seen one or more of the Men in Black movies. One of my favorite movies when I was a kid. And basically, there's this, agency, and they try to keep it under wraps that aliens are living amongst us, right? And so that's what the Men in Black do. And one of the ways that they do this is they have this tool that's called the deneuralizer, and it basically looks like a pen. And whenever some witnesses have seen alien events, and then they're all freaked out, all these citizens and pedestrians have seen it, the Men in Black go up, they use this deneuralizer, they put in these fancy sunglasses, they flash this beam of light in the eye of the citizens, and it wipes their memory of having seen the aliens, and then the Men in Black tell them what really happened, right? And so what you're going to ask yourself here in this question, step number 6, is this: who would you become if you never had that thought? Okay, so if I never ever had the thought of my boss doesn't like me, if I never had the thought of I'm going to have a heart attack, if I never had the thought of I can't drive, or whatever it is for you, okay? If you never had that thought, if it never entered your mind, if it got deneuralized from you, right? It got wiped out of your brain and it no longer entered your mind at all, what would you then feel? That's 6A. How would you feel? If that thought never entered your mind, how would you feel? So if we think about the driving one, I'll actually use the boss one. So if I never had the thought that my boss doesn't like me, if I never had that thought, if I were a person in that situation, I would probably feel confident. I would probably feel happy. I would feel joyful. I would feel probably a sense of friendship with my boss. I would feel like we have a good relationship. I would feel like we have trust. Okay, that's 6A. 6B, what would it cause you to believe is possible, right? If you never had that thought. So sticking with that same frame of mind, now I would feel like growing in the company is possible, getting a promotion is possible, earning more money is possible, etc., etc., etc. Okay? What 6C, what would you feel inclined to do differently? So how would you behave differently? How would you act differently? Well, I would probably go and talk with my boss whenever I needed to speak with them. I would be friendly with my boss. I would be confident with my boss. I would basically go ahead and just say to them whatever it is that they need to hear for the betterment of the company, right? I would not be sheepish about it. And then finally, 6D, what kind of person would you be? So how would this impact your overall identity, right? Well, if I never had the belief that my boss didn't like me, I would probably have the feeling in my identity of I am a good worker, I am a good employee, I am a good asset, I'm a good team member, right? My self-esteem would improve, okay? So that's basically step 6. Now, here's why we're doing this. What we're doing is we're going from the previous steps 4 and 5, where you really get associated with the negative consequences of holding on to the old belief. And then what we're doing is we're contrasting that with the benefits of believing the new belief, right? Or eliminating and getting rid of the old belief. Same difference, basically, okay? And by seeing the huge gap between the pain you're going to experience if you keep the old one and the pleasure you'll experience if you endorse the new one, or at least get rid of the old one, you're going to feel this big compulsion to get rid of this old belief and expel it and no longer adopt it. And this is what I found is really important. But again, remember my warning at the very beginning, you gotta dig deep with this process. You cannot take these questions casually. I see a comment from one of our clients, Jacqueline. She says, this was one of my favorite parts of the 90-day program. It was so impactful for me. And I thank you so much, Jacqueline, for adding that in the comments. And I want to tell you the reason why it was so impactful for her is she wasn't wimpy about this. She didn't take it casually. She wasn't like, oh, okay, well, who would I become if I never had the thought? Well, I'd probably feel better. And what would I believe is possible? Well, anything would be possible, Ty. She didn't just go through the motions. She didn't just, check the box. She dug deep with this process. That's what you have to do. If you want to get mastery over your brain, you have to become a master of switching these levers of pain and pleasure, okay? And this is really, really, really important to do that. I see a question here from Jamie. He says, how can anxiety help a sudden bill that has to be paid next day? How can anxiety help a sudden bill that has to be paid next day? I'm not exactly sure what you're meaning by that, Jamie. That question seems a little out of left field for me. But I'll see if I can loop back to that in a second. Okay, let's move on to step 7. All right, so now we're in kind of the home stretch. Okay, we've got 9 steps, we've got 3 left, and these last ones are pretty quick. Step 7 is arguably the most important part of the whole process. Well, no, I'll save that. This is probably the second most important part of the whole process. This is where we do what is called a turnaround. And this is one of the parts from Byron Katie's original process that I think is just really genius, and it is just incredibly powerful. So this is a 2-step process. So there's 7A and 7B. So 7A is you're going to pick an opposite belief to the original limiting belief. So if my old belief was my boss doesn't like me, my new belief might be my boss and I are on great terms. If my old belief was I cannot drive, maybe my new belief is I certainly can drive, it just might feel a little uneasy for me right now. If my old belief was a comet is going to hit the earth, my new belief might be I'm completely, totally safe. Okay? So you take an opposite of the original assumption. That's 7A. And 7B is you need to find 4 reasons why that new belief is true. So you're going to ask yourself, what are 4 reasons why this new opposite belief is true? And you got to challenge yourself to find at least 4, even if it takes some time. And this is where sometimes people have a little bit of a sticking point because they're not so used to thinking in these terms. They're used to believing the old thought, and so to believe the new thought takes a little bit more effort, takes a little bit more of time for you to kind of think through it. But here's why this process is so important and powerful. And I really want you to listen closely to this, because if you listen closely here, you will understand how your brain works at a deeper level. This took me a long time to figure out. Okay, the brain works through making connections. Okay, so the only way that you can assimilate new information is by relating that new information to information that you already have. Okay, a very simple example of this would be going through grade school, which is something just about 90% of us have done. Let's say mathematics, for example. Almost all of us had to learn algebra in like middle school or high school, right? Parabolas and all those different equations and all that stuff. Remember all that fun stuff? Now, algebra, imagine if we tried to teach somebody algebra before they know addition and subtraction and division and things of that nature. Imagine if we tried to teach them parabolas before they've understood those basic equations. Is that going to work? Absolutely not. Why would that not work? It would not work because we're introducing a concept to them that they would be totally unable to relate that concept to anything else that they've ever experienced in their life. The only way we're able to teach someone algebra is because algebra fundamentally includes those elements. It has addition, it has multiplication, it has division in it, and there's all these different formulas. So once somebody knows addition and division and all those things, then we can teach them algebra. It's kind of like, here's a totally different example, but it illustrates the same point. Think about the very first thing you do as soon as you meet a brand new person. Okay, whenever you meet a brand new person, what is it that you do? You try to find similarities. You try to find connections. You ask them like, hey, where are you from? Who do you know here at this party? What brought you here? What do you do for work, right? And why is it that we feel such a compulsion to do that? It's because we feel very uncomfortable in that vacuum of not being able to create a connection. As soon as you meet somebody and you have no clue who they are or what they do or any of that type of thing, it feels uncomfortable. And the way that we build relationships is by building connections. And the way we build connections is by basically linking 2 pieces of information together. So somebody says, oh yeah, I grew up in Minnesota. And you go, oh my gosh, I used to go fishing in Minnesota. So now you have a way to think of this person you just met at the store or at the party, and you can kind of log them in your brain with Minnesota. Like, oh, well, they're from Minnesota, so that means they probably like, and I'm even pulling from my own brain of connections in Minnesota. I've been there like 3 times in my entire life. I don't know, fishing and hockey and cold weather, and I don't know, I don't want to offend any Minnesotans here, but you get my point, right? Your brain is trying to create those different connections. So, what does this have to do with irrational fears and beliefs? Well, if you have assumed that something is true, what has happened is that the reason why that assumption or that fear has taken hold in your brain so deeply is because it has created what we call false associations. False associations. So, for example, let's say I go to work one day and my boss is irritated. And I go into my boss's office and I give him a project that he asked for, and he is angry. He's irritated. Now, all of a sudden, what I do is I create a connection in my brain. Boss is angry. I'm around my boss. Oh, I know. My boss must be mad at me. And so now I have created an association. Maybe I then see my boss a week later. Same sort of thing happens. Boss is mad. I'm around him. It seems like I'm the thing that caused him to be mad. Ipso facto, now he is mad at me. And so after a couple occurrences of this, now this original belief that I had, or this original thought of my boss doesn't like me, may have just gone in one ear and out the other, except now I've made lots of connections. I've created all these different false associations that have convinced me that my boss just doesn't flat out like me. And so what this ends up doing is it's almost like, this is the metaphor we teach our clients, is it's almost like a table. So like, let's say my phone here, right, is like a tabletop, and the tabletop represents the thought of my boss doesn't like me. Well, if all we have is the thought, it's basically like a totally worthless table, right? It'll just flop right over. It has no structure to it. It's not going to help you at all. But if we take that tabletop and now all of a sudden we put 4 very sturdy legs underneath it, it could like hold the weight of a car potentially, depending on how strong the table is. And so what happens is you'll take that random little thought that could otherwise just go right out, the other ear, but then you start to create connections. You start to create references, is the technical term for it, and then it sticks in your brain. And that's why some of the beliefs that are the stickiest are the ones that are self-fulfilling, especially the ones that have to do with self-worth and self-esteem. So for example, let's say you had a mother who was very difficult to please. You tried to please her one day, she was mad, she wasn't pleased. You tried to please her the next day, she wasn't pleased, she was mad. Eventually you start to tell yourself, nothing will ever please my mother, I'll never be good enough for my mother. And then you might even generalize it to be, I'm just not good enough. And the reason you come to believe such a big, giant, wide-sweeping belief is because you've developed like 100 different connections to that belief of I'm not good enough. Because it used to be just your mom that made you not feel good enough. And then you got in a relationship with a man or woman, and then, they weren't pleased even though you tried to please them. And so then you said, oh, see, look, there's even more proof that I'm not good enough. And now you've got a table with 100 legs underneath it. And you've got a really, really rigid, very, very powerful belief that's not going anywhere unless you challenge it. And that's what this whole process is that I'm teaching you. It's a way to knock the legs out from underneath the tabletop so it falls right over. And what we're doing now in step 7 is we are constructing a new powerful belief. But this is the difference between just positive thinking, where you tell yourself, I am enough, I am enough, I am enough. And that usually doesn't work very well for people. And the reason is they go, I have no proof that I'm enough. I don't have any evidence that I'm enough. I don't believe that. I seem to have way more evidence and proof that I'm not enough. So why would I believe that I am enough? That's kind of the conundrum with just traditional positive thinking. People don't find it really gets to the deep level. And when you just try to basically hypnotize yourself with positive words, that can sometimes help, but for the majority of the population, it doesn't really do much. It doesn't really get down to the deep-rooted stuff. So what you got to do is you got to pick a new empowering belief that's the opposite of the old one. That's 7A. And then 7B is you got to find 4 reasons why the opposite belief is true. So if I go back to the my boss doesn't like me thing, I might say, okay, well, my boss does like me. And I'd say, okay, well, what are 4 reasons for doing that? And what that's going to cause me to do is it's going to cause me to rewrite the narrative of the past that I have been assuming is true up until now. Because up until now, I have probably only selectively remembered the times that my boss has gotten irritated with me. And I'm not remembering all of the times where we shared a good moment or shared a laugh or he was there for me or whatever it is. So if I go back in my brain and say, okay, well, what are 4 reasons why he does like me? I'll probably find some answers. Even if they're small answers, it could be like, oh, well, I made him laugh that one time in the elevator. Or the second reason could be, well, you know what? I always get my work in on time. and so on and so forth, right? So you got to find at least 4 reasons, and I promise you they are there. But this is where the inner work is. This is where you're literally rewiring the brain, and this is why this process, along with all of the different processes that we teach, is way, way, way more powerful than traditional coping mechanisms like talk therapy, because we're really helping you deal with the issues at the subconscious level if you do this properly and if you do it to a T. Okay? Now, step number 8 is, now that you know the consequences of believing the old limiting thought, and now that you know the truth, are you still willing to believe that thought? Yes or no only. Okay? Again, the wording here is incredibly, incredibly important. So you'd want to write it down exactly like this. I'll read it one more time. Step 8. Now that you know the consequences of believing the old limiting thought, and now that you know the truth, are you still willing to believe the old thought? Okay, now for those of you guys kind of listening to this right here, right now, if you're kind of like mentally tracking with me and kind of following along, and you had a particular fear in mind that you've kind of been haphazardly going through this process with me on, this is not going to make a lot of sense to you until you've thoroughly done steps 1 through 7. Okay, so if you're like driving in the car listening to the replay of this, and if I'm asking you this question, like, are you still willing to believe that thought? Your brain is kind of going to be like, well, I don't know. It feels like I should still, because you haven't really thoroughly done steps 1 through step 7. But I promise you, if you really take the time, go back, use pen and paper. This takes about 20 minutes to do this whole process with a belief. And by the time you get to step 8, it'll be a lot easier to say yes or no. Now, I want to point out a key thing in step 8. The key thing in step 8 is, are you still willing to believe that thought? Okay, now notice that I am framing this as a choice, because it is a choice. Okay, this is one thing that I teach that basically no one else out there teaches, but I'm telling you this because it is the truth. Okay, you get to choose what you believe. You get to choose what labels you put on things. You get to choose what words you use to describe your life experiences. You get to choose what things mean, basically. Many of you guys have heard me share this story, this totally, completely true story that happened in World War II. This was cataloged by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was the author of the book Man's Search for Meaning, and he came up with what's called logotherapy. And what he found when he was in, I think he was in Auschwitz. I can't remember if it was exactly Auschwitz. I know he was in a prisoner camp, though. He was taken there as a Jew in the 40s. And what he noticed, he was a psychiatrist at the time, and what he noticed is that there were basically 2 types of prisoners in the camps. There were people who basically kind of gave up right away, and they died very quickly, usually in a couple of weeks, usually. And then there was a second group of people who were more survivor types. Now, they were able to last longer, usually. So the first group of people would, they wouldn't try to sleep. They wouldn't try to eat. They wouldn't try to drink water. They wouldn't take care of themselves. They wouldn't do what they needed to do to survive. The second group of people did every single thing they could possibly do and figure out to survive. And the difference, right, after he interviewed all of these different people, what he found was the difference was the meaning that people gave their circumstances. So here you've got 2 groups of people that are in identical circumstances, identically unfair circumstances, right? They're being persecuted, they're being oppressed. No one would argue the fact that it was completely unfair what was happening to them. But while they were in the middle of that unfair experience, they were choosing what to believe. The first group of prisoners were choosing to believe things like, it's all over, there's no point, I'm gonna die anyway, there's nothing else for me. And so what they ended up doing is basically just hiding in a corner and dying, both metaphorically and literally. While the second group of prisoners had a different meaning. Okay, they had the same situation, but a different meaning that they applied to it. Their meanings, after he interviewed these people, were things like, I have to go on, I have to find my wife, I have to find my husband, I have to find my children. Sometimes it was even just like, we have to get back at the Germans, like we have to, we have to make sure this never happens to the Jews ever again, right? So, but they had some type of a meaning that empowered them, that caused them to look towards the future in a compelling way, if not necessarily a positive way, but some kind of a compelling way. So, question 8, I'll read it one more time for you, is now that you know the consequences of believing the old limiting thought, right? Remember what it causes you to feel, how it causes you to behave, what kind of results it produces in your life, what kind of person it makes you, right? And now that you know the truth, are you still willing to believe that thought? Yes or no only. Now, I think that this part is one of the most important parts that I added in that Byron Katie didn't, because I am here to tell you that if you don't have the mental health that you want today, it is because you are not affirming all of the choices that you have. You have convinced yourself that you have fewer choices than you actually do have. And one of the choices that you have is what to believe, which beliefs to give energy to versus which beliefs you starve energy from. Okay, so that's why you got to make a declaration, make a clear decision. Am I willing to believe this, yes or no? And again, don't entertain any of that bullshit of, well, I really don't want to. I mean, I'd really love to think the positive thing, but this is where you got to say, no, I am no longer willing to believe the old thing. Now, that doesn't mean that old, oops, there goes my light. Sorry about that. Got my light and jerry-rigged there. Sorry that scared you guys. The reason why you've got to be very definitive about this is because that thought will probably pop up once or twice here or there, but it has no power over you so long as you decide you're going to starve it of energy. Okay, problems need energy to grow, and limiting beliefs need energy to grow too. So if you want to make sure you eliminate the limiting belief, you have to decide you're not going to feed it any more energy. That's a really powerful, important thing. All right, and then finally, step number 9 is what will be all of the good that will come from endorsing your new belief, right? As in the opposite, positive, empowering belief. Write down at least 4 answers and as many as you can think of. Okay, so that's step 9. What will be all of the good that will come from endorsing your new belief? Write down at least 4 answers and as many as you can think of. And this is, again, another principle of psychology that I could take a whole lot longer to explain to you, but I just want you to trust that this is how it works. But if you want to get yourself to follow through on something, you've got to get yourself associated to the positive outcome in advance. So for example, those of you who are having trouble like working out, it's because you're not imagining the positive outcomes of working out enough. You're more so thinking of and focusing on the negative aspects of working out, like the effort involved and the time sacrifice and things like that. So you've got to kind of forecast into your mind. It's called future pacing. It's where you get your brain to create a new vision of the future, which is, what will my future in my life be like now that I've chosen to eliminate that old belief? I've chosen to no longer endorse that old belief. Okay, and you got to take a few minutes to write that out and then kind of imagine that, ideally visualize it. But if you're not a visual person, that's okay. At least just describe it, okay? Now I'm going to add in kind of like a step number 10 here, basically like a bonus step to make sure that you actually implement and to make sure that you follow through with this and that it becomes easier. And that would be, if and when the limiting thought ever pops up again, what you would say to yourself, and again, the specific phrasing here is really important. So what you're going to say to yourself, if and when that limiting thought pops up again, is no, capital N-O, no, I refuse to believe X, Y, Z. The truth is A, B, C. Okay? So no, I refuse to believe that my boss doesn't like me. The truth is he's just going through a tough time right now. Okay? No, I refuse to believe that I can't drive. The truth is I can and I will drive even if I feel a little nervous. No, it is not true that I'm going to have a heart attack. The truth is I'm just feeling a little anxious right now. Okay, you get my point. Now, the reason why this phrasing is really important, I'll tell you the most important word in this is refuse. I refuse to. Because what you have to do is cut off the option of entertaining the old belief. Don't assume it. Don't allow yourself to assume it anymore. You have to truly decide, okay? And the word decide comes from the Latin root de cadere, which means to cut off from. Like you're almost like you're cutting off a limb. It's like, okay, it's gone, it's severed. I'm no longer giving that any energy. Okay, and I just I'm asking you for a little bit of trust, and you don't have to take my word for it, but just try this and see how it works for you, because I can tell you these are the words, these are the phrases that work. I've tried them on myself, and we've had over 500 successful clients. It works, right? We vetted this and refined this and worked on it over the years. So try this out. It'll work really well. Now, you may have a whole lot of limiting fears and beliefs and stuff. Like when we have our typical client go through this process and we help them directly, like to work through this, they usually have like 6, maybe upwards of 10 in more extreme situations. So you may need to do some digging on this. And of course, if you want some help, like actually making sure you pluck out the right beliefs and you apply this process properly, let us know. And, we can always help you as a client if that's something you'd like some assistance with. So 2 final things, and then we're going to wrap up. For those of you who would like one-on-one assistance, okay, the way our program works, to give you a little bit of a clue, is I work with you directly one-on-one, and I help you implement and apply our system. And if you don't feel like you've reduced your anxiety by at least 75% in 90 days, I continue to work with you for free until you do, until you feel satisfied that you have. And also, what we're doing this month, we've added a new additional guarantee in writing for people's satisfaction, which is that if you go through the very first week of the program, as in you do your very first session with me and you go through your very first week of assignments and lessons, and you don't feel like it is absolutely the right place and the right thing for you to do, like you're not feeling 100% sure you're in the right place, then you can back out and get a total refund, and you can walk away and you pay nothing. Because we know that your number one concern is, okay, how can I know for sure that your method is absolutely going to work for me? And you're worried that you're going to take a lot of time and energy trying to apply yourself to a method that may not definitely work. So we want to enable you to have the opportunity to try it completely risk-free. So if that sounds interesting to you and you would like some help, we do have just a couple slots left for the month of August, going into September. So go ahead and put the word apply in the comments if you'd like to be considered for that. We'll go ahead and shoot you a message. We'll see if you're a good fit. If it seems like you're a good fit, we'll book a quick call to verify that you are, and then we'll go through all the details and make sure that it's really a good solution for you. If you guys are joining on the podcast later, go ahead and go to mentalhealthcoaching.com. You can book your call that way. And then the second and final thing is we have a completely free gift for you guys who decided to join live with us. What we're willing to give you is the PDF worksheet that basically our clients use to eliminate their limiting beliefs, going through all of these steps. So it kind of guides you through it. It makes it easier to keep yourself on track. It's a full PDF, and you can print it out or you can fill it in digitally, but you could use it as many times for as many beliefs as you could possibly want. So if you want a free copy of the PDF, go ahead and put PDF in the comments, and again, we'll go ahead and message you on Facebook, we'll go ahead and make sure that you get that download file, again, completely for free. So just a free gift that we have for those of you guys who are showing up live, and we really appreciate it. So I will be back with you guys live next week, 6 p.m. Eastern time for our next live stream. Thank you guys so much for joining, and for those of you guys who put things in the comments, thank you, Carla, for really assisting the community with your great comments. Thank you guys. Remember that getting rid of your anxiety is absolutely obtainable, but it's something that you have to reach out, you have to seize, you have to take action to implement the right steps. So hope you guys found this helpful. I'll see you guys next time. Take care. See ya. Bye.